Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at Slime Adventure: The Mystical Forest from a couple of publishers who are probably going to regret that I ever reviewed their game, but I will say their name anyways. LPOMC and Sneaky Bear. And I would like to take a moment to note that the box for the games is like this really cool, like retro, I don't know, like Game Boy Advance almost. Is that how their boxes were? But it reminds me of an old video game. Anywho, now it's an interesting story how I came to finally review this game. I've actually owned this game for 2 years, something like that, and never got around to even playing it or touching it. Well, I should say I touched it, I opened it, I looked through it, and buried it on my shelf so that no one would accidentally pick it up and look at it. And I had no idea what to do with it from then on, and you will realize why that is when we get to the overview. But recently, as it so happens, even though this is an obscure Asian game that was just sort of fell into my lap from a publisher who sent me a bunch of games all at once, it is for sale on the Board Game Geek store. You can go there and purchase it right now, unless it's sold out, with a bunch of other obscure Asian, Japanese, and other games. And I found that ponderous. I commented on the thread that announced the new update to the store and said, I'm kind of shocked that you guys would carry this game. And that set off a whole thing, to the point where I think it was the first ever official Board Game Geek notice on the site that had to be moved to the Religion, Sex, Politics forum. And again, this will all become clear in a moment, but let me give you a synopsis of what this game actually is thematically. You and the other players are these like weird, intelligent slime creatures who can mutate and change their bodies and use them to make attacks and so on. And they all have different special abilities. And you are trying to, well, do your slime thing when adventurers come out and try to kill you. And so you try to capture those adventurers. And there's a giant naked man that looks like the mayor from Final Fight who's involved somehow. If you're confused, that's fine. I'll clear this up for you, but I will forewarn you, if you are the type of person who does not know what hentai is, or you know what it is and avoid it like the plague, I would probably skip the overview. Slime Adventure: The Mystical Forest is a competitive game for 3 to 5 players. It's also the zenith of every nightmare scenario your mother ever conjured in her mind while thinking about how obsessed you are with anime. The goal of the game is to be the first slime to reach 6 mutations and become, and I quote, the king slime who will lead the species to the glorious victory of endless food. The game might also end when there are less than 4 adventurer stacks left, at which point everyone counts up their points based on their mutations and the adventurers that they've fought. I say with air quotes flapping so furiously they create wind shear. Each player takes a pair of slime character cards. One of them you just keep in front of you to remind you of your special ability, the other will be a token you move about the Den of Iniquity, the play area. The slime have special abilities like combat avoidance or the ability to cycle through cards faster. They do not provide abilities like Shame and Dignity. You must provide those for yourselves. There is a separate deck of attack cards, and 3 cards in equal quantities: Corrosion, Smash, and Terror. Every player starts with 3 of these, and you'll always draw back up to it at the end of your turn. Another deck of cards represents Mutations. Shuffle these and put 3 face up next to the deck. Mutations represent permanent special abilities you can gain, and they're also your path to victory. Sweet, hideously immoral victory. Each card has a cost in adventurer points at the bottom, and a special ability. These run the gamut from giving you extra combat symbols, to giving you free adventurer cards, to giving you special movement. Finally, you must set up the play area. Take the Naked Gentleman card gingerly and tenderly with a loving hand, and place his greased up body in the center of the table. He's a researcher, trying to be one with the slimes. You remember how Jane Goodall used to be naked to examine the chimpanzees, right? What? She didn't do that? Never mind. In turn order, each player takes a stack of adventurer cards and places them out in the play area, such that each adventurer is orthogonally adjacent to another adventurer. Next, you'll each put your slimes out on the table, again making sure you're adjacent to an adventurer. Then you're ready to begin the game. But let's back up a second. What was that about adventurers? Oh yes, you see, there are 6 different adventurers. Each adventurer has 6 cards, and you place them in a stack in descending order. Number 6 on top, number 1 on the bottom. Every card has a different colored letter corresponding to the attack cards. That's what you need to use to fight these cards. And as you mill down through the stack and players take more and more cards, the formerly heavily armed and armored adventurers somehow get more and more of their clothes ripped off. And you, the slimes, use your appendages to surround them, restrict them more and more. It's an interesting combat technique and one I'll have to bring up to my dungeon master the next time we fight an ooze in D&D. One thing's for sure, as you can tell, women are treated with the utmost respect here by the designer and the artist, who both must get laid, like, all the time. Turns in the game have 3 phases. In the combat phase, you fight the adventurer cards. Every adventurer you're adjacent to must be fought by discarding the appropriate type of attack card. Your opponents can trip you up if they're also adjacent to you, by discarding a card and therefore forcing you to discard another card of the same symbol to win overall. If you win the entire combat, you take all the top adventurer cards off their stacks that are orthogonally to you and put them in front of you. If you fail by even 1 card, you're disabled and removed from the play area. If another player had contributed to that combat, they gain one of your claimed adventurer cards, if any. You'll come back at the start of your next combat phase, but you will not fight. Next is the action phase. If you were knocked out before, you don't get to do anything here. Everyone else gets 1 action to use one of the following. Movement simply lets you move from one spot of the board to another, as long as you end adjacent to a slime or adventurer. Bait is the same thing. You're moving an adventurer stack, not a slime. Mutation lets you buy one of the mutation cards by spending the adventurer cards you've gained. It gets replaced, and you put the card in front of you. Finally, the third phase is Transform. You discard any number of cards and then draw back up to 3 cards. And that, mercifully, is it. Get to 6 mutations before the other players do, and then take a shower to wash away the shame. Let's get to my final thoughts. Okay, I am going to address the 800-pound gorilla in the room. But before we get to that, and I promise I will, I want to talk about just the game. I'm talking about the actual mechanisms of this game, what you do when you sit down at the table and try to play it. As a game, Slime Adventure is pretty bad, okay? It just is. I actually appreciate what they were going for here. There are some things that, taken by themselves, I like. The fact that each of the player characters, the slimes that you take control of, have a different special ability, not only right off the bat, but the fact that you mutate over time. The fact that you feel this progression. You get like this suite of powers that make you feel different and distinct from the other players. I talk about that a lot, and it's something that I really appreciate in games. It's one of the reasons why there's so many Euro games I'll never appreciate, because everyone's doing the same things. It's just a matter of who outsmarts who with the same mechanisms and the same actions. So the fact that you can feel different and powerful in different ways in Slime Adventure, I like and appreciate that. Tacked onto that is a spatial element to the game, which I was not expecting. I thought this, at first glance, would just be a simple trick-taking card game. And instead it's like, oh, I'm actually moving around on a board and trying to fight and have a combat thing. And it's like, it almost reminds me of games like, is it Triple Triad? Was that Final Fantasy VIII game? Where depending on where you place your card, you would battle the other cards. Or in more board game parlance, again, we're only talking mechanically here, it seems similar to Cell Swords. Or there was a preview game I did for like Yokai Battle. So it kind of gave me that feeling, but together with, hey, I'm buying cards. And it was interesting in that regard. And the adventurer cards that you capture can be used as currency, and I thought that was all pretty interesting. And if, depending on how you the game is going to end, you may want to hold on to those adventurer cards as points. So again, these interesting disparate elements I like. All of them coming together, though, is a big hot mess. The best thing about this game is that it's quick, and yet at the same time it's too long for me to not feel like I wasted my time with it. The two major bad elements about it, first and foremost, is that this is a game of false choices. I hate that. What I mean by that is that you have different actions you can do on your turn. You can just choose, you always will combat, and you must combat unless you have some special ability when you're next to adventurers. But then you have an action that you can use to either move yourself, move one of the adventurer stacks, or move or just buy a mutation. But most of the time, unless you are in a really desperate situation, this is a false choice. This is a race. This is a race to see who gets to the most mutations first. Turn order becomes crucially important, as does just buying mutations as soon as you can. And because there's a lot of very cheap mutations, you're like, oh, and we'll get to this in a moment, this isn't as good as that one, but I still need to get a mutation. If I don't get one this turn, I'm falling behind. And yet, you can do the actions of moving yourself or moving an adventurer stack. It's like, I'm going to screw that person over. By doing that, you're giving up your precious action to hopefully try and get a mutation. Unless you're just shit out of luck and you have no adventurer cards, which can happen. But especially in this goes up to 5 players, where if you're doing that to someone, the other player's like, oh, okay, we'll just stay out of that. And we have the right cards to go over here to these adventurer stacks, so we'll just keep getting cards and buying mutations while you two jockey back and forth. I hate that. Everyone should be doing the same thing by the rules as written, and so I consider it to be a false choice. It just feels like it's an illusion that you have different options in this game. And so that's kind of frustrating. Really frustrating. The other problem is the mutations themselves. Again, I like the element in theory. I hate the fact that some of these mutations are way overpowered compared to the rest of them. And here's where it comes down to randomness, where if it's your turn and you just so happen to have the right amount of adventurers and the right card comes up in the lineup, you buy that, boom, the snowball begins. You now are way ahead, not just in mutations, potentially, because you're consistently buying them, but now just having constant, like, there's one that gives you a bigger hand. That's huge. There's one that gives you free adventurers every single turn. I mean, there's several cards that actually are like that, by the way. Whereas other ones are just like, oh, hey, no one can make you, lose an adventurer, some crap like that. Way, way disparate power balances. And again, the game is not very long, but it's too long to put up with that crap. So again, as a game, I wouldn't recommend it. There's some interesting things going on. If it was put back in the oven for about another 25 development cycles, it'd probably be okay. But as it is, not worth the time and effort. And it's definitely not worth the time and effort given the theme, which we are now getting back to. To put it bluntly, it's absolutely abhorrent, hideous, whatever word you want to use. Now look, I mentioned this in that thread that I referred to earlier. I get the rap of being the creepy anime guy. Why? Because I wear anime t-shirts, and I did a top 10 anime list, and I like anime. I've never made that a secret. I'll review anime-themed games, like, they're not really anime-themed, but Tanto Cuore and Heart of Crown, blah, blah, blah. Sure, okay, fine. I'm a creepy anime guy. But to suggest that I would be okay with something like this is a bridge too far. And no one really has. But it's interesting to me because I reviewed a game called Tentacle Bento, which Tentacle Bento is a horrific game as a game. In fact, it's even worse than this. I'll at least give Slime Adventure that. Tentacle Bento is worse. But they have a similar theme. The theme being like everyone is this horrible monster who's trying to, let's just get down to it, rape women. That is what's going on in Slime Adventure, and if it's not what you think is happening, you're kidding yourself. Tentacle Bento alluded to that as well, but in Tentacle Bento, first off, if you glance at the artwork, you would never know that. They purposefully went out of their way, Soda Pop, to not be total monsters and actually depict women being raped on their cards. And in that regard, while the game itself was terrible, I said, I appreciate Soda Pop making a joke, because it is a joke. There's nothing funny about, simulated rape, but there is this joke about anime with tentacles and all that different stuff that Soda Pop was alluding to, and I took it in that spirit. And I hope that a lot of other people did. Some people didn't. That was the controversy, okay? However, Slime Adventure, there's no joke here, okay? This was clearly designed to pander to people, really, really dark, perverted anime fans who are into this. And it's not just that they went full bore and depicted, several, 6 or 7 different adventurers in basically just being raped, all the way down to them being practically nude, okay? To the point where I almost felt like, do I need to censor this when I do the overview? And I had questions about whether I should even show it, but I was like, how can I talk about it without actually showing it? That's bad in and of itself. But then, and I don't know if you actually looked at it long enough, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. The cards depict these women being depicted in progressive stages of undress and being assaulted and hit. And the names of the attacks in this game are Tear and Corrosion and Slam, I think is the other one. Okay, so that's what's up. That's what's going on. But as you go through the progression of this artwork, they seem to enjoy it. Like, that's what it depicts on the last card, the very last worst one of all these adventurers. That is the worst thing, okay? That is something that I have seen in other types of, like, hentai, and yes, I've seen hentai before, where it's almost like this is this is what it happens. Like, hey, if you force yourself on a woman, she'll eventually enjoy it. And while it might seem like a leap to go there, again, to me, that is clearly what's being depicted in this game. So I have a pretty strong stomach for this kind of garbage usually, as far as whether it's taken in a joking manner and it's part of the community. Otaku joke around with it amongst each other. There's a lot of women in the community. Everyone finds it funny to a degree. This is a degree that I cannot sanction or condone, and it's why it has sat on my shelf, and I'm like, what do I do with this piece of garbage? And in a way, I'm happy that the game itself is horrifically bad. Otherwise, well, I still couldn't justify it. Even if I sat here and told you honestly that the game was really, really good, I wouldn't be keeping it, and I wouldn't expect anyone else to as well. And I can understand the argument that art is art. Who are you to be so subjective and to tell people what is, abhorrent and what isn't? I would just say, I can't I'll turn a phrase of that old quote. I can't tell you what is disgustingly offensive, like what the point-by-point bar is, but I know it when I see it. And I'll also say the same thing I said for Barbarossa. Oh, hell, Barbarossa, from Japan Made Games, looks like freaking a Haba game compared to this, by the way. I think Barbarossa actually comes out looking better for this game having existed. But I said it in Barbarossa. Why did you do it? Why couldn't you just depict anime girls just normally? Like Tansokore. Okay? Then you get the anime audience, you make a game, you don't have to put it in the Third Reich with anime girls showing their panties. Everybody's happy. So why did this game decide to do it? And the reason they decided to do it is because they had really nasty, perverted thoughts and were hoping to drag other people in with them. That's the kind of audience they were trying to appeal to. So that's it. That was probably too long-winded, but if you have any kind of curiosity about Slime Adventure, you decide for yourself, but at least now you have all the information and you have my take on it. That is Slime Adventure: The Mystical Forest from a couple of publishers who probably should have known better. Board Game Brawl Judgment into my garbage can. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.